The old cafe on Main Street still smelled like cinnamon and lavender, the way it always had when Alara first began writing here. Time seemed to slow inside those faded brick walls, where tiny candles flickered on the tables, their soft glow. Chasing away the dreariness of the late October rain, she sat at her usual window seat, sketchbook resting on her knees, coffee untouched. The world outside blurred in streaks of water, gray and heavy. People rushed by under umbrellas, unaware. They were stepping through a memory she could never quite forget. It had been 3 years. 3 years since Aidan Blake walked out of her life without warning, leaving only a single handwritten note. No explanations, no promises, just ink on a page that said he had to go. She had burned that letter twice. Once in anger, once in grief, and yet something in her refused to let him go completely. Aidan had etched himself into every quiet moment, every shadow between pages, every whisper of music that made her chest tighten. She had tried moving on, dated casually, traveled, immersed herself in her illustrations, but no one had ever filled that silence where his voice used to live. The cafe door chimed, breaking the spell. She didn't look up at first. Rain made the entrance feel like a whisper, but then a strange stillness fell over the room. She glanced toward the door, more out of instinct than curiosity, and her breath caught. There he stood, older maybe, taller somehow. His dark hair, once a wild mess of waves, was now damp and slicked back, and his shoulders bore the weight of something heavier than just the rain. But his eyes, that same stormy blue that used to unravel her, met hers across the room like no time had passed at all. Aidan. Elara gripped the edge of the table to keep herself from standing. She couldn't tell if she wanted to run or scream or melt right there into her chair. He took a slow step forward, then another, not breaking eye contact. Her chest pounded with 1,000 unsaid things. Elara, he said softly, like her name, was a memory he'd spoken aloud every night. What are you doing here? Her voice was calm, too calm, betraying none of the chaos inside her. I didn't know you'd still come here, he said, glancing around, then back at her. Or maybe I hoped you would. She stared at him, years of silence pressing down on her shoulders, and if I hadn't, he hesitated. Then maybe I'd sit alone and try to remember who I used to be. Before I lost you, she hated how her heart responded, how it leapt despite itself. Aidan motioned to the empty chair across from her. May I? Alara considered it. Every instinct told her to guard the pieces of herself he'd once scattered. But curiosity, old, aching, relentless, nodded before she could stop it. He sat slowly, as if the weight of this moment was too fragile to crush. There was silence between them for a time, the kind that curled around the edges of their breaths and filled in all the cracks words couldn't reach. You disappeared, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. You left, Aidan, no warning, no reason. I waited. For what? I know, he said quietly. I was a coward. She let that hang in the air. The rain intensified outside, tapping against the glass like a ticking clock. I got scared, he continued, folding his hands on the table, of how much I loved you, of how much you saw through me. You were the first person who looked past the charm in the words and saw all the broken parts, and I didn't know how to let myself be loved that way. That's not an excuse, Alara said, though her voice trembled. It's not, he agreed, but it's the truth. Alara blinked back tears she didn't. No, she still carried. I wrote you letters you never read. I painted portraits with your eyes hidden in the brush strokes. You haunted everything I created, and you weren't even real anymore. He swallowed hard. I read them. The ones you left in your blog. I watched from far away. I wasn't proud of it, but I wasn't strong enough to come back until now. Why? Now? Because the memory of you became louder than the fear. he said simply, and I couldn't chase shadows anymore. I needed to know if maybe you could ever look at me the same way again. She turned her eyes back to the rain, to the window that had seen her through loneliness and longing and everything in between. I'm not the same girl you left. I know, and I don't expect her to come back, but I'd like to know the woman you've become. She looked at him then fully and saw the regret that lived behind his eyes. The kind of regret that couldn't be faked. The kind that came from someone who had learned how much it hurt to be empty. For a long while, neither spoke. The past sat between them like an invisible guest. Finally, Alara reached for her coffee, now lukewarm, and took a sip. If I let you stay, if I let you explain, don't run again, Aiden. His voice cracked. Never again. She nodded, barely, and turned back to her sketchbook. With a pencil in hand, she began drawing a new patron over Wren Street, a man at a cafe table, and a girl slowly letting down the walls around her heart, because sometimes memories don't fade. Sometimes they wait for the moment love dares to try again. Alara Quinn lived in a small apartment above an old record store, where music drifted through the floorboards like memories she couldn't shake. Her life had become a series of quiet routines: morning coffee at the cafe, afternoons spent at the local art studio, and nights curled under a blanket, sketching characters for books she hadn't yet found the courage to pitch. She had once been a dreamer with stars in her eyes and her heart tucked into journals and gallery walls. But ever since Aiden left, she'd buried herself in projects, in commissions and children's book illustrations, building a careful rhythm that didn't hurt as much as stillness. People admired her for her soft smile, her generosity, the way she taught watercolor classes at the community center, like each brushstroke held healing. What they didn't know was that Alara had grown used to painting silence into every sky, every field, every fox curled under twilight trees. Meanwhile, Aiden Blake had spent those missing years moving from place to place, first Boston, then Montreal, then San Francisco. He worked in architectural design, drafting the kinds of buildings people lived in but never thought about. But no matter how many cities he touched, no blueprint ever felt like home. He was talented, yes driven, even but hollow in the spaces that mattered. He told himself leading Alara had been for her own good, that she deserved someone whole. But as the years passed, that excuse decayed like old paper. He carried her name like a phantom melody playing every time he saw a fox-shaped charm, every time it rained, every time he passed a bookstore, and wondered if she'd found her happy ending without him. His return to Wren Hollow wasn't planned. He hadn't imagined stepping back into that cafe and seeing her again. But when he visited his father's empty house after his passing, everything about the town pulled him back: soft rain, quiet streets, and Alara's name in the corners of every memory. Wren Hollow itself was a place time had forgotten in all the best ways. Brick sidewalks lined with ivy, antique shops filled with stories, and a community that clung to kindness like it was sacred. There was something about it nostalgic and grounding that made it perfect for souls trying to find themselves again. Alara's world existed in that quiet magic. She knew every shopkeeper by name, every dog that passed her window. She volunteered every Thursday at the children's library, painting whimsical characters on the walls, while kids watched with wide eyes and sticky fingers. But she also kept her heart locked in a drawer. She told herself she wasn't bitter, just wiser. She had loved once with a kind of purity that made her believe in forever, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to do it again. Not when the person she gave it to had turned away without even looking back. Yet now, Aiden was here. Not in a memory, not in a sketch, but real Dot, and the town noticed Dot by the end of the week. Mrs. Lark from the florist shop had already accidentally delivered him a bouquet meant for Alara. The barista at the cafe, Finn, who'd always harbored a quiet crush on her, looked at Aiden like a knight watching a dragon stroll into the village. Even Mia, Alara's best friend, raised an eyebrow when she found out. Do you think he's changed? Mia asked one evening over caramel tea. Alara hesitated. I don't know. He's single quotes, S. About different, quieter, like someone who's lived with. Ghosts. And do you still love him? Alara's heart thudded. I don't know, but she did know. It wasn't a matter of if she still loved him. It was whether she trusted herself to feel it again. Aiden, meanwhile, tried not to rush. Anything. He started frequenting the cafe again, choosing a corner table and only approaching Alara if she acknowledged him first. Sometimes they'd talk about small things, books, the weather, the new mural on the library wall. Other times they'd sit in silence. Not awkward, but watchful, careful. One rainy afternoon, Aiden dropped by the community center where Alara was cleaning up after an art class. Paint speckled her fingers. Her cheeks were pink from laughing with the kids. Need a hand? He offered. She glanced at him, guarded. Only if you don't mind glitter. Is it washable? Depends who you ask. He rolled up his sleeves and helped gather paintbrushes and paper cranes. When he handed her a spilled jar of sequins, their fingers brushed. Just a moment, but her breath hitched. She looked away quickly. Why did you really leave, Aiden? Don't give me the poetic version. He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, because I thought loving someone like me would ruin you. I didn't grow up knowing how to hold on to things that mattered. And the closer we got, the more terrified I became that I'd lose you anyway. So I ran first. Alara stared at the watercolor stars on the wall behind him. You did lose me. I know, he said. And I've spent every day since trying to find the courage to come back. She wanted to stay angry. She did. But she could see it in him, the humility, the sorrow, the way his hands trembled when he reached for anything close to her. He hadn't come back to rewrite history. He'd come back because something inside him still believed in it. The days turned to weeks. Slowly, cautiously, the barriers softened. They began to share old jokes again. Aiden even visited her art studio, offering awkward but endearing compliments on her fox and flower sketches. He helped carry supplies to her gallery exhibition, always lingering afterward like a man not ready to leave her side. One evening, he walked her home. The wind was cool and the sky brushed in lavender dusk. Outside her apartment door, she paused. Never stopped wondering if you were happy, he said. Alara searched his eyes. I was fine, but never really whole. Neither was I. The silence between them hummed, not empty, but full of everything unspoken. Good night, Aiden, she said softly. Good night, Alara. And for the first time in years, she went upstairs feeling like a door had creaked open inside her chest, just wide enough to let the light in. The town of Wren. Hollow shifted slowly from late autumn into winter. And with it, something subtle began to stir between Alara and Aiden like a forgotten melody finding its rhythm again. It began in small, almost imperceptible ways. Aiden started showing up to Alara's Saturday morning art classes, not to intrude, but to help. He'd carry easels, refill water jars, and stand in the back with a smile as the children painted foxes and lanterns and trees that touched the stars. Alara didn't ask him to come, but she also didn't ask him to stop. One afternoon, after the children had left and the last paintbrush had been washed, they sat together beneath the wide arched windows of the community center. The light poured in golden and soft, casting shadows on the floor like whispers. Aiden watched her tuck a stray curl behind her ear as she sorted through paper scraps. You still do that, he said. Do what? Touch your hair when you're thinking? You used to do it when you read something beautiful too. She paused, her eyes flickering toward him. You used to notice everything. I still do, he said, voice quieter now. I never stopped. That day, he walked her home again. And for the first time, she invited him inside Dot. It wasn't a date, not officially, but it felt like something delicate and real. She brewed cinnamon tea while he explored the room with quiet reverence. Her apartment was exactly what he imagined: soft earth tones, potted ivy trailing down the shelves, sketchbooks stacked beside candles, and a record player still humming old songs. Aiden picked up one of her framed illustrations. A fox curled beneath a tree, eyes closed, the sky above dotted with stars. "This was always your favorite image," he said. "It still is." They drank their tea in silence, not needing to fill it. And when he stood to leave, she walked him to the door and lingered there, just long enough for her fingers to brush his. He looked at her like he might say something more, but instead he smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow." She nodded. The next day, he brought her a fox-shaped ceramic from a vintage shop. "I thought it looked like one of yours," he said sheepishly. Alara smiled genuinely. "It does." "Thank you." From there, their days unfolded like a slow dance. They visited the winter market together, weaving between stalls wrapped in garlands and golden lights. Alara bought spice cider, and Aiden surprised her with a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. He noticed when she was tired. She noticed when he was distant. There was still a space between them, but it was no longer cold. It was careful, healing. One evening, Alara invited him to help paint a new mural at the town library. It was her biggest project, yet a snowy landscape with wildflowers pushing through the ice, meant to symbolize resilience and hope. They painted for hours in companionable silence, their laughter echoing off stone walls. At one point, Aiden accidentally smudged white paint across his cheek, and Alara reached out without thinking, brushing it off with her thumb. Their eyes locked. Neither of them moved for a long moment. He spoke first, voice low. "I miss this, us." Her breath caught. "Me too." She didn't lean in, neither did he. But something shifted in that silence, something warmer than words. Another time they walked the path behind the bookstore just as snow began to fall. Alara tilted her face to the sky, smiling as flakes gathered in her hair. "You always loved the snow," Aiden said. "It feels like everything pauses," she replied, her voice soft, like the world is catching its breath. They stood there for minutes, watching the town blur into a watercolor of whites and grays. He reached out, brushing a flake from her cheek. "Do you ever think about what we were?" he asked. "All the time. And what we might still be?" Alara didn't answer, not with words. But she didn't step away either. They began spending evenings together, sketching or talking on her couch until the sky turned indigo. Sometimes they didn't speak at all, just existed, side by side, with music playing softly in the background. Aiden confessed his fears one night, not dramatically, just a whisper in the quiet. "I kept thinking I would break you," he said. "That loving me would cost you more than it gave." Alara looked at him, her voice steady. "You didn't break me, you hurt me. But I was already learning to bend." She reached for his hand, and I think maybe we both needed time to remember who we are. That night, he didn't kiss her, and she didn't ask him to. But when he left, he touched her cheek with a reverence that said everything he hadn't yet put into words. Their connection deepened through the simplest things. Sharing books, cooking dinner, strolling through the park, and watching children build snowmen. Aiden started helping her design her new studio, measuring walls and sketching ideas. Alara slipped encouraging notes into his jacket pocket, just like she used to years ago. One read, "You're more than enough, even on your quiet days." Another, "Come back soon. I saved your favorite tea." The attraction was undeniable now, but it wasn't just about romance. It was about rediscovery, about finding pieces of themselves in each other. Every time they were together, it felt Like a memory being rewritten with tenderness. One night, Aiden invited Alara to his childhood home. They sat by the fireplace in the living room he'd once avoided, now warmed by his presence. He showed her old photos him with messy hair, braces, awkward grins. She laughed so hard she cried. Later, in the soft glow of firelight, he turned to her. "I was a fool to leave," he said. "But I want to be wise enough now to stay." Alara reached for his hand. "Then stay. No promises. No grand declarations. Just honesty. Just warmth. The kind of love that grows not with thunder, but with the slow unfolding of two hearts learning how to be beside each other again. By the time winter gave way to the first hints of spring, something had undeniably shifted. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was the quiet unfolding of a relationship that had once fractured, now healing in golden threads. Alara and Aiden had fallen into a rhythm. Mornings sometimes began with shared coffee. Evenings ended with long walks or movie nights under woven blankets. But it wasn't just the time they spent together, it was how they spent it. They started opening up in ways they hadn't before. Even during their first time around, one evening, curled up on Alara's couch with rain tapping gently against the window, Aiden turned to her and said, "Can I tell you something I never said before?" She looked up from her tea, her eyes searching his, always. "I was scared back then when things got serious. I thought I had to be perfect to deserve you, and when I wasn't, I panicked." Her fingers brushed against his. "You didn't have to be perfect, just present." He closed his eyes briefly. "I wish I'd understood that sooner." "You're here now," she said softly. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, the guilt in his gaze faded just a little. That same week, Alara took Aiden to the trail by Willow Ridge, the place she'd gone to think during their time apart. They stood at the overlook, watching fog roll over the hills like a soft breath. "This is where I cried after your last letter," she said quietly. "The one where you didn't say goodbye, but I knew it was over." Aiden swallowed, his voice tight. "I never said goodbye because I didn't know how to." She reached for his hand. "Say hello again instead." And he did by wrapping his arms around her, holding her like something sacred. Their closeness grew in small, treasured moments. Aiden started leaving notes in Alara's sketchbook. "You bring color to places I didn't know were gray." She, in turn, would find songs that reminded her of him and leave the lyrics written on his mirror with a dry erase marker. They had their first proper date. One crisp Saturday, Aiden packed a picnic and drove them to a lakeside he used to visit with his parents. There was a wooden dock, a small rowboat, and the sound of birdsong cutting through the stillness. Alara wore a yellow scarf that danced in the wind, and Aiden couldn't stop smiling. They ate sandwiches, sipped warm cider, and lay on the blanket talking about everything: books, childhood, regrets, and the small things that had kept them afloat. "You used to dream of illustrating children's books," Aiden said, watching a dragonfly skim across the lake. "I still do. I have ideas. That they just never felt ready." "They're ready now," he said with certainty. Her eyes shimmered. "Maybe I think I'm finally brave enough." That night, he gave her a journal, leather-bound and embossed with a fox and a lantern. Inside, on the first page, he'd written, "For the stories you haven't told yet, I'll read every word." She didn't say anything for a long while, just leaned in, resting her forehead against his. One quiet Thursday, Alara invited Aiden to help paint her studio walls. He arrived with coffee and a radio, and they danced barefoot across drop cloths, hands stained with blue and green. It was messy and playful, and when they finished, Alara painted a tiny heart behind a shelf just for them. They shared deeper things, too. Alara talked about her father's silence growing up, about the way she'd always feared she was too much for people. Aiden listened with his whole being, never interrupting, never judging, He spoke of his parents' divorce, the pressure he'd felt to succeed, the times he'd buried his anxiety beneath achievements and long flights, how loneliness followed him from city to city until it dulled everything. They held each other through those conversations, touch as steady as their words. A snowy Sunday, they visited a small bookshop in the neighboring town. Alara ran her fingers over spines like they were treasures. Aiden watched her with reverence. She found an old poetry book by Rainer Maria Rilke and read him a line that made her heart ache. I want to be with those who know secret things, or else alone. He took the book from her hands and bought it. That night, he wrote the quote on her kitchen, CHALKBOARD, days blurred into weeks, filled with tiny rituals. Sunday breakfasts at the cafe near the river. Wednesday game nights with her best friend Clara. Friday phone calls with Aiden's younger sister, who had always liked Alara better than him anyway. One starlit evening, they stood on Alara's rooftop, a quilt wrapped around them, watching the moon hang like a pearl in the sky. I want to build something lasting this time, Aiden said quietly. She turned her head, resting it against his shoulder. Then let's not rush it. Let's get it right. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. With you, I want every version of forever. There was no longer fear in her eyes, only tenderness. The kind of love that didn't demand but offered. That didn't promise perfection but persistence. And so they kept building, not with declarations but with presence, with laughter and tears, and quiet companionship with the slow realization that the kind of love worth having wasn't the kind that burned, fast and bright, but the kind that glowed. Steady and sure, even through the darkest nights. The studio was warm, sunlight spilling through the skylight, but Alara's hands were cold. She stared at her phone, at the email that had landed only moments ago, a literary agent in New York. Loved her manuscript. They wanted a meeting, in person. Next week, it should have been exhilarating. This was the dream. But a knot twisted in her chest. Across town, Aiden was finalizing the blueprint for a community library project he'd proposed. It was meaningful work, the kind he'd left corporate architecture to pursue, and the nonprofit had hinted at a full-time offer. In London, the timing couldn't have been worse or more painfully perfect. That evening, they met for dinner at the little Italian place tucked beside the river. The food was good, the lighting soft, but the space between them buzzed with unspoken words. I got an email today, Alara said carefully. Aiden looked up from his pasta. Yeah, from an agent. She read the night the sky forgot to sleep. She wants to meet. That's incredible, he said, smiling. But the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. When? Next Thursday. In Manhattan. Aiden nodded, fork pausing midair. You should go? I want to, she said, then hesitated. But I don't know what that means for. He didn't answer right away. The clatter of dishes and soft music filled the silence. I got an email too, he finally said. From Whitbridge Design. They want me on full-time for the community expansion project. Alara blinked. That's in London. He nodded. Yeah, it is. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. It felt like the air around them thinned out back at her apartment, Aiden paced. We just got back here, Alara. We just found each other again. And I'm supposed to give up this opportunity? She asked, voice rising slightly. No, he said quickly. Of course not. I'm just saying, what are we doing if we're both leaving? I didn't say I was leaving. I don't know what I'm saying, she admitted, folding her arms across her chest. They sat apart on the couch that night. The same couch where they'd held each other weeks before now felt like it held the weight of a decision neither of them was ready to make. Days passed. Neither brought up the offers again, but the distance between them grew. Aiden buried himself in designs. Alara stared at blank pages. They were both present, yet slipping. One afternoon, Alara met Clara for coffee. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara stirred her latte. "Of what?" "That it'll fall apart again. That we'll choose our careers, our dreams, and lose each other." "Maybe," Clara said gently, "but maybe you'll choose each other and your dreams. Love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means trusting enough to let go just for a while." That night, Aiden stood in the doorway of her studio. "You've been quiet," he said. "So have you." He stepped closer. "I've been thinking." "So have I," she echoed. "I'm scared," he admitted. She looked at him, startled. "I'm scared that if I leave, I'll lose you again, and I don't know if I could survive it twice." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm scared if I don't go, I'll lose myself." They stood in the center of the room, both wounded by the same truth. Love didn't erase dreams. But dreams often ask love to bend. "I love you, Alara." "I love you too. But what do we do with that?" he asked, a thread of desperation in his voice. She stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "We hold on. Even if it hurts." He nodded, eyes closed. "Promise me something." "Anything. No matter what happens, no matter where we go, we don't forget this version of us, this love." She reached up, brushing her lips against his cheek. "Never." The next morning, Alara boarded a train to New York. Aiden watched her go, hand in his pocket, clutching the charm she'd made him, an etched compass that always pointed home. He returned to his apartment, packed away the model he'd been working on, and sent a message to Whitbridge. Then he stood in the quiet, breathing in the ache of almost and the hope of maybe. Their love hadn't ended, but it had reached the place all real love stories reach the test. The storm. The question of whether something beautiful could survive the bend of fate. The city was loud, rushed. It pulsed with energy Alara hadn't felt in years. Skyscrapers reflected a winter sun that never quite warmed her skin. New York was everything she'd once dreamed of, and yet it felt like something was missing. She met with the agent in a corner cafe near Central Park. The woman was sharp, enthusiastic, and completely in love with Alara's manuscript. "You have something special." "Here," she said, flipping through the pages of The Night the Sky Forgot to Sleep. "The way you write emotion, it feels lived in." "Like memory?" Alara smiled. "It is. We'd love to offer representation. We think we can get it into the hands of a major publisher, but you'd need to consider relocating. For edits, events, proximity." Alara's heart skipped. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had hoped to hear, and yet Aiden's voice echoed in her mind. "I want every version of forever with you." After the meeting, she walked aimlessly through the city, past flower stalls and bookstores, people rushing every direction. It all felt distant, beautiful, and wrong. She sat on a bench near the reservoir as the sun began to dip. Pulling her phone from her coat, she found a photo taken by Clara the night they'd repainted the studio. She and Aiden were laughing, paint on their cheeks, joy written every curve of their bodies. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She didn't press it back in Older Creek. Aiden stared out the studio window. Snow had begun to fall again. He hadn't heard from Alara since her meeting. He didn't blame her. He hadn't reached out either. They were both standing on opposite ends of the same uncertain bridge, waiting for the other to cross. Clara. "Stopped by that evening? You look like you're waiting for someone who might not be coming," she said gently. "I am." She sat beside him. "Then go to her." He shook his head. "She's probably making the biggest decision of her career." "Exactly," Clara said. "And if you're part of her story, really part of it, then you belong in that decision." The next morning, Aiden booked a flight. Alara was packing when the knock came. She opened the door and froze. Aiden stood there, snow in his hair, a duffel on his shoulder, and a look on his face that could break 1,000 silences. "I couldn't wait anymore," he said. She stepped back, heart hammering. "You came all the way here?" He nodded. "Because I needed you to know something. And I couldn't say it through a screen." Her hands trembled. "What?" "That I love you, and I don't want to make. You choose, not between me and your dreams. I want you to chase them. I want to be the person cheering the loudest from the front row." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "But what about your work?" "I'll find a way." We always thought one of us had to give something up, but maybe we don't. Maybe we just take turns, compromise, visit, figure it out. She stepped into him, arms wrapping tightly around his waist. "I was so scared you wouldn't wait." "I'll always wait for you," he whispered into her hair. They stood in the quiet city noise fading into nothing. Two hearts stitched together again by honesty and courage. Later that night, as snow danced past the windows, they lay side by side on her bed. "What did the agent say?" He asked. "She wants me to move here." His heart tightened. "And?" "She also said there's no rush, that great stories take time. She's willing to work remotely for now." He looked at her, hope flickering in his chest. "So what does that mean?" She smiled. "It means I'm coming home. At least for a while. To you." His eyes closed in relief. "We'll figure out the rest together," she said. He kissed her, then slow and sure. The next morning, they walked through Central Park, hands entwined, snow crunching beneath their boots. They talked about what came next: video calls, train rides, weekends stolen back from time. They didn't have every answer, but they had each other, and that was enough. Spring in Alder Creek arrived slowly, shyly, as if it too was relearning how to bloom. The snow melted into streams that carried secrets through cobblestone lanes. Buds peeked out from barren branches, and in the windows of the little art studio near the bakery, sunlight spilled across canvases that had waited patiently for color to return. Alara stepped into the studio with a fresh bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a bag of croissants in the other. Aiden looked up from the drafting table and grinned. "You bring pastries every time you visit. You trying to bribe me into loving you more?" She leaned over to kiss his cheek. "Bribes work, right?" He tugged her closer. "Always." It had been 3 months since she returned from New York. She hadn't turned down the publishing deal, but she'd negotiated it on her terms: remote edits, flexible schedules, time to breathe. Her book, The Night the Sky Forgot to Sleep, was set to release in the fall. Her second novel was already growing in quiet notes tucked between napkins and her favorite notebook. Aiden, in turn, had accepted a new architectural project designing a creative community space near the river. It was a smaller scope than his past projects, but it was personal, intimate, and he got to build it side by side with Alara, who was commissioned to paint a mural that would run across the courtyard wall. They'd learned to find a rhythm in the spaces between ambition and affection. Some days were quiet shared tea, stolen kisses, brushes of fingers as they worked. Others were loud deadline panic, artistic blocks, clashing visions. But they never let silence stretch too far anymore. Not the kind that hurt. One evening, as golden light spilled across the mural sketch pinned to the wall, Aiden stood behind Alara, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Do you ever think," he whispered, "how close we came to missing this?" She rested her head back on his shoulder. "All the time." He kissed her temple. "I don't want to miss anything else." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" He turned her gently until she was facing him. His eyes searched hers, steady, uncertain. "Alara, I want to build every chapter with you. The ones full of dreams, the ones filled with doubt, even the messy ones. I want 100 quiet mornings and 10,000 loud ones. Will you marry me? Her heart swelled with something soft and bright. You didn't even get down on one knee. He chuckled. I didn't think you'd care. She pulled him close. I don't. But just for tradition. He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple ring from his pocket. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It was silver with an engraving inside that read, found in the quiet. Tears blurred her eyes as she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They held each other for what felt like forever, laughter mingling with unshed tears, the wedding being quietly. No grand guest list, no ballroom. Just their closest people, Clara with her camera, the baker who had watched their story unfold, the elderly couple who owned the bookshop where Alara had once hidden behind shelves. They married in the courtyard they helped design, surrounded by blooms and fresh paint. The mural behind them depicted a fox and a sparrow perched on a rooftop, looking out over a sky that was beginning to remember how to shine. Alara walked toward Aiden barefoot, her dress simple, her smile anything, but their vows were quiet, unrushed. Honest. I loved you in silence, she whispered, before I ever found the courage to say it aloud. And I'll love you in every moment after loudly, fully, always. Aiden took her hands. You chased your dreams. And still, you chose to return to mine. I promise I'll never take that for granted. The crowd clapped as they kissed soft. And sure, like the final note of a song they'd written together that night. As the stars blinked awake above Alder Creek, Ilara and Aiden danced in the garden, music playing faintly from a nearby speaker. She laughed as he twirled her barefoot across the lawn. They didn't care that they were the last two awake, or that fireflies circled like blessings. They had found love not in perfection, but in persistence. Not in loud declarations, but in whispered promises and quiet choices taught as they sat beneath the tree Aiden had planted in his grandmother's memory. Alara nestled her head on his shoulder and whispered, "It was always you." He pressed a kiss into her hair. "And it always will be."